Boundless Spirit, pushing the limits of talk radio with Charlene Springer.
Welcome to Boundless Spirit Radio, and I'm your host, Charlene Springer. Wow, it's going to be an incredible show today. We've got Jerry Wills here with us, and he is a healer, teacher. I call him a great adventurer. Yes, he's a musician. He's also a talk show host, and I say TV show host. And you'll hear and see more of what Jerry has to offer. Welcome, Jerry. How are you today?
Thank you, Charlene. I'm doing well.
Great. I missed you. For those of you who don't know the story with Jerry, Jerry's the one that actually introduced me to some of the incredible places in Peru and Bolivia. And because of his documentaries and that you'd find on Xpedition TV, I actually made a few of those trips, and man, it was definitely life-changing. And this is what you bring to the world. You find these incredible places that have intense energy, and you write about it. And your wife, Kathy, she takes the pictures, and you guys do your documentaries. And, for people who can't make it, they get to experience it through you. And for others who can make it, it's their trips of a lifetime. So thank you, of course, you guys, for doing what you do. And first of all, when did you start even thinking about, let me go find all the mystical places in the world? When did that come up?
Well, that happened a long time ago because I was an avid reader. And I think one of the first books that I came across that really sparked my interest was those by Eric von Däniken. The Gold of the Gods, and I don't remember all the titles now. It's been so many years, but they were just fascinating. And of course, the question you have to ask yourself is, what if this is true? And how would you know if you didn't go there to see it for yourself? So I wanted to in the worst way, and it was in the early 90s that a fellow had a trip going to Peru. He asked me if I would be the guest host on this trip. Up to that point in time, I was traveling all over the world doing lectures about UFOs and extraterrestrials and psychic phenomena and such. And I had quite a large following, tens of thousands of people were staying in touch with me, and that's when it was done by mail. Their email was just beginning to evolve. So I was spending a small fortune on stamps every month, but I tried to keep in touch with folks. And when this opportunity came up, I was just thrilled. So I took it, went to Peru. It was kind of a vanilla trip. There wasn't high adventure and all of that. It was just, go here, go there, see this, see that, stick to a time schedule and so forth. And the whole time I'm doing this, I'm thinking, if I were doing this, here's how I'd do it. And I'm sure a lot of people would think that way too. Well, sure enough, I get back. This guy says, I'm not doing any more trips to Peru. Do you want my mailing list? And of course, jumped on it. That added to my mailing list. The first trip that I offered down there in the early 90s filled up in 2 weeks, and I had to quickly schedule another trip, 2 within a month. And it just went on from there. And the entire time, the trips were UFO-centric, paranormal-centric, and I tried to base the trips on a book that was just starting to become noticed. This is called The Celestine Prophecy. So the trips were loosely based on the Celestine Prophecy, where I was teaching each of the insights and then taking people to this lake. It's called Lake Waipo. UFOs fly in and out of it. going to places in the middle of the night to watch UFOs, to see strange phenomena. The whole thing was just a big adventure, and people loved it. So continued on with that until about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And then I just, of course, decided that, well, with Kathy, we decided that it was better to just stop because the prices were becoming pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
We used to offer a trip to Peru, airfare from wherever you are in the United States, plus 2 weeks in Peru, everything covered except for your supper, tips and taxes, and things like your bottled water and such. All of that for $2,550.
Wow.
At this point, well, you went. You know what the expenses are like down there.
Yeah. It's gotten a lot more.
Yeah, quite a bit. And you don't get an improvement in services, which you would think if you get an improvement in services, maybe it's worth it, but you don't.
Mm-hmm.
So now Kathy and I just periodically go down there on our own or other places in the world to shoot documentaries and investigate these strange places. But the whole idea about that was so that folks that couldn't go, like it was for me, you see some of these fantastic places portrayed on YouTube or in people's pictures, and you hear these even more fantastic stories. And sometimes it's someone's best guess, or they had an actual event. So we decided that what we would do is to go to these strange places, because after all those years, we knew so many people, and there were so many places that most folks never see. So we decided to take the camera and start making short videos about it, and it evolved into Xpeditions TV. We actually moved to Peru twice, a year each time, to do this. It was quite the adventure. It really was a lot of fun. It was difficult at times, but a lot of fun.
So you brought to the forefront a lot of places that are not on your normal list of attractions in Peru. Usually you see, and people never touched Bolivia. Bolivia was fairly new to a lot of people too. One of the ones that actually stuck out the most for me was the doorway of Amaru, and it was life-changing again. So do you want to talk about that, discovering that or experiencing that? So
this my journey there to Muru is in the southern region of Peru, right close to Lake Titicaca. And if you go another, I don't remember now, it's less than an hour south, you cross the border into Bolivia at a really skanky town called Desaguadero. It's a border frontier town, so it's kind of lawless, a little spooky, at night. But it was, like second or third time I'd gone to Peru, ended up there at the doorway, and no one knew about it. No one ever went there. It was just one of those things that we went to Lake Titicaca with the group because they wanted to go to Lake Titicaca. I'd never been, so I thought that'd be interesting for me too. And one of the guides, because you make friends with these people as you travel, and one of the guides is traveling with us said, "Have you ever heard of this place?" And I said, "No, I haven't." He says, "Well, you really need to see it." So we spent a little extra, got everybody on a bus, and went there. And I was just astonished. It was just in the middle of a big vacant region in Peru. There weren't any houses. There was nothing but a highway. That was it. Now you go there are houses and people walking around, and it's busy. But at the time, it wasn't. It was later that I met a fellow named Pedro who was a shaman. The people in that region are Aymara, and the language they speak is Aymara. And I'm told that it is a dialect directly connected to the Japanese language. Well, I was fascinated by all this, and this fellow and I became friends over the course of time and many trips through there. And so he ended up telling me stories about this place, and I didn't really know. I mean, a lot of people say they're shaman, but I really didn't know that he was a master, that people went to study with him to become, final parts of them being a shaman. But he told me that there were things that happened there that he could relate to me, and how the doorway worked, how you open it, and so forth. And still, I'm thinking that this is really kind of I don't know, is it mythology? Is it just a tall tale? I just couldn't believe that something like this was actually possible. Well, he said there are some tones that you use, and when you make these tones and you're in the kneeling position in front of the door, that the doorway will activate and it will suck you inside, and you'll go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, where do you go? I said, well, I don't know. He says, you have to be very clear on where you want to go. And it was all a bit vague and very mysterious. So I'm thinking this is a tall tale. And I never even tried it. I never tried it for quite a while. I just thought it was a lot of hokey pokey. And then when Kathy and I got married in 90, I think it was 97, 98. She's listening.
I
know. One of the things that happened is we went down there specifically to try these tones with a group of people. And she says, well, what happens if you just disappear? And I said, I don't think that's going to happen, really. So, she's always cautious, and always not too cautious, of course, but concerned, I guess is a better way of phrasing it. Well, we end up there at 11 o'clock at night, because that's when Pedro said would be a good time to do it. So we get there at 11 o'clock at night, and I've got this big white London fog, down-filled coat. I'm pretty tall, so I'm easy to see anyway. But this white thing against these dark stones stood out like a beacon. And it's just as cold as hell there. It really is cold, especially at night. Well, you were there. You probably went out
in the day.
So I went and kneeled down like I was instructed to, and put my head there in the little indentation. I started making these tones, and I started getting real dizzy. And I continued, and then it felt like I had fallen forward, and everything just really went very crazy for me past that point. It did suck me in. I did go somewhere. And where I went, I just don't have a clue. I know what I saw, which wasn't that much of a big description. But for Kathy and the others who were there, they saw me shimmer like a light was around me, and then just fade out, and I was gone.
Whoa.
Well, it really freaked Kathy out. And I guess it would have freaked me out, too, if I'd been on that side of the equation.
Right.
For me, I thought I was gone for a few hours. It really felt like I was gone for a while. And finally, the people on the other end of this gave me some pointers on how to get back home. So I did it, and I ended up flying, forward again, and ended up back of the doorway. Well, when I ended up back there, Kathy said that there was another shimmer, and then there I was in front of the doorway, and I was back. For her, it only lasted for about 2 minutes.
Wow.
So there's something to it. It's a very strange thing. And there's been a lot of people who have challenged me on this and said, oh, you're just making up that story. You're just, and maybe I am. No, I'm not. But, the thing is that there's always people that's got something to say.
Yeah.
And I really don't care if they believe it or not. I know what I experienced, and it was not fun. It was just, it really shook me up.
Who were the people, Jerry? Who were the people on the other side?
I never saw them. I just heard them. They were communicating. It wasn't a they. It was a person, one person. Okay. And he was communicating with me as though there was an intercom system between he and I.
Mm.
And, the conversation was lengthy. I was fascinated by the science and the technology that he was talking about, why they'd made this thing, what I was looking at, how all of this was even possible still remains a mystery, but given that this voice of this person was telling me that they had developed something very similar to CERN.
Whoa.
At least he didn't call it that. I'm calling it that.
Right.
They developed this particle accelerator that, trying to discover these elements of the universe, and they collided some things. He didn't say collided. I think he said they had joined things energetically together, this massive device, and that a spark of life occurred, and a universe was born, and the universe that was born was ours.
Mm.
So it was an experiment for them to understand where they came from and where they fit in the cosmos. And in doing that, they created another universe, or maybe it was just, a window so they could look into another universe. It seemed like they created it, though, from everything he had said.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's where I'd come from. And so they were going in there periodically to just take a look around. This place, that place. Some of it was not very clear. And if it was clear at the time, it isn't now. Mm-hmm. There were many details that were discussed, and I don't remember all of them.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest concern past the point was not being able to tell time. I had one of these Timex watches, tells you the altitude and so forth, barometric pressure, temperature, all that jazz, has a compass in it. Anyway, it just flat wasn't working at all.
Mm.
So I didn't know how long I'd been gone, but it seemed like it'd been gone a very long time. And I was getting very worried, because if, part of your mind is telling you that you're not really having this experience. This is just, you must have passed out and you're having a great dream. But it was too vivid to be any of that. It was quite real, especially when I came back.
So now, Jerry, with all this, you said it was timeless in that space. So now, do you think that you still have some residue with that timelessness that you carry?
I don't know. The thing that occurs to me is that I always have had, I suppose, an issue with time. It's a wonder that I made the interview on time today. Everything I tried to do is, I see what time it is, I know what I need to do, and somehow I blink my eyes and 5 minutes have gone by and I'm late, or half hour and I'm late. Kathy helps keep me on task these days.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I've just never had a good link with time. So, the timelessness of that experience, perhaps there's some residue, but kind of hard to find it because I have my own issues with it anyway.
Well, I can tell you that when went there. It was during the day, and it was some friends of mine from here. And when I put my head, I was the last one to go. And just before I put my head, all the, I forgot the birds, they look like hawks. They were flying overhead, making a circle above my head. I'm going, okay, this is weird. And I put my head in, and I could feel the pull. There's this pull. Something pulls you to go through it. And with no tone or anything, but I felt a pull. And, I thought to myself, is there anyone here that could bring me back? And there wasn't. So I backed off. I said, I have to do this at another time when I have like a really good shaman there in case anything happens. But you feel
Well,
a pull. There's something that pulls there.
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I've never really made those tones public. A lot
Yeah.
of people say, "Well, I don't care. I've nothing here to be for anyway." But in my view of things, there's two elements to this. One, I think it's dangerous. If you don't know how to
Yes.
steer a car, you shouldn't get in it.
Yes.
And the other part is there are some really creepy people in the world that would just love to have something like this and go raise hell somewhere else in the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
I tend to just keep that piece of information to myself, even though, there's a lot of folks that are very unhappy with me because I do, and it's not because I don't trust them.
Mm-hmm.
It's that I have my own sense of responsibility with this that I don't want to violate.
Yeah.
It's not about other people. It's about me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, you are a healer. When did this gift show up? Because, you have all these experiences, so they must affect the work that you do. So let's talk about the beginning of your healing journey. What happened? Why are you a healer?
Well, that's a good question. I ask myself that a lot too. So I'm used to that question. When I was a kid, I mean, we're talking young, I remember back to about 2 years old, and then there's a space in there that's real vague, and then another little blip on the radar screen, earlier than that even. But I think when I really started noticing something very peculiar was probably around 7 years old. My father had died. We were living in Denver, Colorado. And there was something wrong with me there too. Maybe not wrong with me, but wrong as far as everyone else was concerned, because I would write with both hands, but I had my own language with one hand, and I was trying to learn the alphabet with the other. So I had to have my hand tied behind my back so I didn't use both hands, and chastised that I had to be right-handed. Well, around 7 years old, after he'd passed away, we'd moved back into the hills of Kentucky, a very impoverished area. And I was staying with my grandma down in this place called 88 Kentucky, which I think there's a post office and maybe the general store and the post office are the same thing. It's just maybe one building, at least it was. It's probably a subdivision now. But so here I was. And I started noticing I could hear people thinking. I heard what they were saying in their heads. And I knew things before they were going to happen. All of these psychic traits. I could hold something. I could hear all the stories about it. I could see it like a movie in my mind. All these really, at the time, there was no way to describe it to anyone. And there weren't really any words to explain it. This wasn't a mainstream topic. It was actually pretty forbidden. It was about as bad as being bisexual or homosexual or something. It was just such a forbidden thing, back then. So I was out playing, and she lived like in this holler, and there were no houses within 10 miles of her. Way back in the forest in the country. And I was rolling down this hill, and I thought it was fun. You know how kids will do that.
Mm-hmm.
Get at the top and just roll like a log all the way at the bottom. Get up, go do it again.
I love it.
Yeah, I thought it was great. You know, I had on my shorts, no T-shirt, no shoes. She comes running over there where I'm at. Well, I was rolling down a hill of poison ivy.
Ooh.
And so she was pretty upset by that. And I didn't know what poison ivy was. I lived in Denver. There was any poison ivy. There's stickers you stepped on. That's about it. So she started rubbing me all over. Come to find out later in years that she was well known as a healer. A person gets burned, she'd rub the burn and go away. I mean, she could do some pretty strange things, and that's one of the reasons she lived so far away from other people. She was well known in some circles as being a witch because she was such a powerful healer. That's what they called healers. There were psychic healers back then. If you weren't an evangelist, holy roller, then you were a witch. There were no other distinctions. So as she's rubbing me all over, that's the reason she was rubbing, because that's how she healed. She stopped and she says, I remember this clearly. She says, oh my God, or oh my Lord, boy, you've got the gift. You've got a powerful gift. She says, well, you'll never have to worry about poison ivy or anything, will you? And she says, now go over there and jump in the creek and wash off and come on up. Supper will be ready soon. So I did. And that was the end of that. I never got poison ivy, and I've never had it. It wasn't until I was a little older that I started experimenting with it. And, of course, my mom, she was very quick to chastise me. Don't talk about this. You know, you don't want people to know about this. So I pretty much kept it under a bucket. But there was this one time that this fellow, this older man, well, I mean, I'm probably older than he is, was then, but, he seemed like an older guy to me. He's probably in his late 40s. He'd stepped off the back of this little Ford Cub tractor, and it was muddy, and he slipped with those rubber boots he had on, and apparently it hurt his knee, probably tore the meniscus. And he's collapsed on the ground. He hobbles over to the house, sits on a bench, and he's rubbing his knee, and he goes, oh Lordy, my knee, I've hurt my knee. And I felt so bad for him. And of course, I was seeing energy around things. I was knowing things. All this was just getting more and more powerful as I got older. And I said, do you mind if I take a look at it? He said, what are you going to do, boy? I said, I don't know. So I put my hands on it. Let me feel if anything's broken. And so he pulled his hands away. I put my hands on there, closed my eyes, took a breath. And within 30 seconds, I pulled my hands off. And I said, how's that feel now? And he looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. It had quit hurting. And he bent it a few times while he was sitting there, and it didn't hurt. So he got up, started walking. He says, what the hell did you do? And he just wasn't very pleased at all, which I thought was strange. And so he had to walk about a mile to get to his house, across the fields. And so he took off walking, and next thing you know, the neighborhood's talking about it. And nobody wants to talk to me. Nobody wants to be around me. I'm scary. So that was pretty much the first time with a person. I worked with animals quite a bit because they didn't seem to complain or mind at all. They were actually great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we didn't have any horses. We had cows and pigs, and well, there were birds and dogs and cats and mice,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing.
Nice, nice, nice. Wow. So then now you've taken it to another level. You're helping people again because now people have accepted healer.
Well, that's true, but it didn't happen for quite a while. Nobody, there just wasn't a vocabulary for this, and no one could believe it was possible unless you happened to be a Pentecostal minister or evangelist of some sort, because these tent guys would show up and they'd be, you're healed, and crutches would go down and people would walk off the stage or get out of a wheelchair. They could suddenly see. But no one else could do that. So I wasn't supposed to. And here I was, 18, seeing this sort of thing. I was real curious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I got involved in a place called the Lighthouse, this in our little town. And it was almost Pentecostal. And I thought it was all kind of odd, but at least they believe in healing. So they really liked what I was able to do. People with broken legs got their casts cut off. People that couldn't see walked out the door seeing. All these problems just magically floated away from them. And I did that for a better part of a year, and then I got real tired of it because, in my way of thinking, you shouldn't have to say certain words to be accepted by certain people, but everybody else that doesn't say those words, then they're heathen. I thought that was just wrong. So I got out of that and just went my own way. And basically, I kept this whole thing to myself for quite a long time. Went through a couple marriages, a couple divorces, ended up finally at about 43, well, probably about 41 years old. I was traveling around the world by then, doing lectures on UFOs, and I threw in a little bit of the psychic phenomena stuff too, and working on some people here and there. I had my own business, and some people came to my store and they needed help, and they knew I'd do this.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, I had to keep it all a big secret because no one really wanted to know about any of this stuff. And finally, I just really got tired of that. It's like I'm leading two lives. I would rather be dead than to do this. I cannot wear this mask any longer. And so as soon as I threw the mask down and stomped on it, that marriage ended because she thought it was all goofy, even though she'd seen what I could do. So I felt pretty alone in the world. Well, remember Pedro?
Mm-hmm. The shaman.
Mm-hmm. Pedro did a coca leaf reading for me down in Peru. I didn't want it, but he insisted. And he proceeds to tell me that I'm going to be divorced in 6 months and not working with electricity within the year. And it's like, oh, great, what am I going to do? Well, what you came here to do. And the coca leaves are telling him that there's someone who's waiting for me. And this person has hair like gold, and she lives in the heart. Well, that's vague. I mean, what does that mean? So he goes over to a map with a broken off tree stick, and he's tapping around. He says, well, I'm paraphrasing right now, but it's like, you're going to meet her here in Kansas City, and she lives here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Well, I have no plans on going to Kansas City, and I sure as hell don't want to go to Lincoln, Nebraska. Well, as it turns out, I got back home from that trip, and I'm going to Kansas City to do a lecture. Tickets were right there in the mail. And while I'm there, this girl with this hair like gold walks up to me and introduces herself as Kathy. Mm-hmm. As it turns out, she lives in Lincoln, Nebraska, so you can probably figure out what happened past that point.
It was meant to be.
And of course, the thing about having met Kathy, there's so many important parts about that to me personally.
Mm-hmm.
But for where it led me next, she was the only person that I'd ever been with, that close to, that said, you're working with electronics things and really great at fixing them. But you're not supposed to be doing that. You're supposed to be fixing people. You're supposed to be helping people. And it's because she stood by my side and gave me a reason to take that next step and that next one and the next one after, that I actually started working in a professional, within a professional model, working with people and turning my back on the electronics and just devoting all of my time and energy on working with people. And because she did that, I don't know how many people it's been, over 20 years, but there are thousands and thousands of people that I've been able to help because of that. And I still continue. We sometimes are called to go across town or go around the world to go help somebody. And when I get a call like that, we put things in place and we go and do what we need to do. I have people calling from all over the world that want me to help them. Mm-hmm. And, all over the world, all over the country, it's the word has spread quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Do you do distance healing, or does it have to be in person?
No, distance healing is fine. Mm-hmm. What I've discovered about all this is, in this realm where I work, there isn't any distance anyway. Mm-hmm. So as a result of that, it doesn't matter. I can project myself to where they are, no matter where they are. It gets a little dizzying at times. I think the one that really threw me for a loop was going from Cape Town, South Africa, to Finland, and then over to China, all in one day.
Yeah, that'll hurt. So now you did UFOs. You did this whole where you were actually lecturing about UFOs. When did that start in your life?
That started, let me think, probably the early 80s. Mm-hmm. I'm really not sure, but it was somewhere in the, no, it would be it had to be the mid to late 80s. Mm-hmm. Probably mid to late 80s. And I just basically was invited to lecture at a local place in Phoenix. And then it led to another invitation somewhere else. And finally, I started speaking at events for Tim Beckley. Mm-hmm. And then I got invited to go to Europe, travel around Europe doing this as well.
Mm-hmm. But what made you get into UFOs? Did you see it? Did you experience it? Did you study it? What made you even get into it?
Oh, well,
mm-hmm.
That's another thing, isn't it? Well, when I was growing up on the farm, like I said, I was quite a bit different. And some of the things that were going on had to do with UFOs. In that part of Kentucky, which is central Kentucky, it's not too far from Fort Knox. And a lot of people were seeing all kinds of UFOs floating around through the trees and going through the skies and so forth. And there was a lot of talk about it. For myself, I saw quite a bit. And, there were things that happened where I had face-to-face contact with these people over the course of about 4 years, where we had a series of visits, maybe at least once a month, and sometimes, 3 times a month. It was a visit that included conversations and um, that went on, sometimes for an hour. It was a very interesting time. So I learned a lot from these folks, and as a result of that, I felt that, I had something to say when I had an opportunity to speak about UFOs. And there are always people who have their own take on this. In other words, they've researched it and they believe this, that, and the other, or they've seen something and so they've extrapolated these details as a result of that, or they got a psychic impression or telepathic message. All these different variables. But I didn't really talk to anybody or hear anybody that was actually saying that they had sat down and spoken with the extraterrestrials at length over the course of many years and had any information like the information I had. So I thought, maybe this would contribute to what's known.
Mm-hmm. What races were you speaking to? Were they all the same race of aliens, or were there different races?
No, they just look like people.
Mm-hmm.
If you saw them on the street, you wouldn't really notice them.
Right.
They might look in that part of the world, Kentucky, they might look European, but there were people from Fort Knox and the surrounding support communities of Fort Knox, where you have a wide variety of different ethnic groups. So, seeing somebody that looks like they're from Europe isn't that big of a deal. You kind of got used to it.
Mm-hmm.
But no,
Now,
these look like people.
Yeah, so not like grays or whatever the other races are now.
Well, I did see those as well.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much then as I did later in life.
Mm-hmm.
But no, predominantly it was just people.
How many different races have you seen? Have you encountered, Jerry?
4 or 5. It's been predominantly some variation on the grays. They're like, maybe 3 foot tall. They're not very tall. They have a huge head. They look disproportionate. But there's another race that looks similar to them that are, anywhere from 5.5 to 6 foot tall. But they're not gray. They are a bluish white color.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be pretty nice. And then there's ones, of course, look like people, and there are quite a few variations on that theme because, people just look different as people do.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There was another that was about the same height as the 3 foot grays, but they were just covered in black hair. They looked kind of blocky. I didn't care for them at all. And then I didn't see these people. I was shown images, images of what they look like, and these were like reptilian, looked like lizard people.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never seen that for myself. I just saw images of it, back then when I was, I don't know, 14 years old, 15 years old. They were showing me all these things. There's others that they're really nondescript. They're tall. It's like they wear these hoods and these long shrouds, almost like a Grim Reaper looking thing, but they're not the Grim Reaper, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I never did see what they actually look like, and I only saw them once, so I really can't address anything except what they were wearing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it.
Oh, that's a lot. I think more than the average person, don't you think?
Well, I suppose. But that was the thing, my impetus for going forward and telling what I knew. So I wasn't hearing about any of this. A lot of the information was channeled information. People would see UFOs, they'd have channeled information. That was pretty much it. It wasn't until Travis Walton disappeared for a while and then came back, and he had some stories to tell. But Aside from that, no, not really much else.
Now, with all this and because I've heard this a few times from different people, they always give you a message for the planet. Did they give you a message for the planet? And did they all have a similar theme, or were there totally different themes when they were talking or teaching you?
No, there wasn't any message at all for the planet.
Mm-hmm.
It was basically showing me what was to come.
Mm.
That
And
was about it.
what's to come, Jerry? What's to come?
Well, that still is in a bit of limbo, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
They told me that when the world goes to Riyadh, that a decision had been made on what direction this world was going to go. There were two directions, one towards peace and one towards war. If the choice was made to go to war for violence, then there were going to be some very difficult times ahead. And I remember back in the early 90s when I saw the headlines, the world goes to Riyadh, and it's finally that I didn't know what Riyadh was, and after my meeting with them, it was like, oh, that's kind of curious, but I didn't pay much attention to it. I thought it was like a word, a foreign word that meant something. Who knows
Mm-hmm.
what? I didn't know it was a place. Well, as it turns out, it is a place. I think it's Kuwait. And anyway, I knew at that moment that the world was now going in a darker direction. It wasn't until the 9/11 events took place that I was absolutely certain that it was too late to change anything towards the better, because there are too many dark powers involved to steer the world in a different direction. So the idea was, if it goes that direction towards a darker future, then the only thing that wins over that darkness, in kind of a silly, airy-fairy way, is to say the light. But it really isn't silly, because, there are two different forces at work on this planet. And at that point, you need to do something to help other people. And it might have been part of the reasoning that I had, that I just felt compelled that I had to do something different with my life than what I was doing, that I had to go in the direction that I knew I could do, that I knew, or I really wasn't sure how to do any of it until Kathy came along. But it was a situation where I felt that I had a direction I had to go in. And I think that was part of the impetus for me feeling like I had to take off that mask. I had to go in this other direction.
So, in helping other people, does that bring more light in because you influence them and then they can in turn influence others?
Well, perhaps, but in a small way. I
Mm-hmm.
think, with what I try to impart to others, because what I do isn't necessarily just healing, but it's empowering. And I try to teach what I do as well. Because if the world is going to change, it doesn't do any good for me as a healer to stand on this high point and say, here, look what I can do. All you sick people, come on over here. Let's fix you up. Because that immediately insinuates that they are powerless to help themselves. That's part of the reason why I've never, done any drum banging or self-promotion to let people know who I am and what I do. I leave that to others. Because ultimately what it amounts to is that people will either feel they have a chance at their own personal greatness, or they'll feel like they'll never be able to be what you are. And that last one isn't a very good choice, because if people feel like they're not ever going to be what you are, where you are spiritually, any of these things, then you're not doing what you're here to do. This isn't about how great you are or how good you are. It is really what can you do to help others be great?
Mm.
And that's the attitude I've always had, and the attitude that I try to keep firmly in place, as I take my next step, metaphorically speaking, through life. So in that respect, helping others to realize their own power, that's how I help. That's how I point a direction. Not that I'm leading them, I'm showing them how to get there, because they need to be able to do this without me.
You talk about being in that space when you do your work. Are we talking multi-dimensional spaces? What kind of space are we talking about when you're in that zone to work?
It's like I'm outside of time. When I'm working on someone, I prefer to be in a very dark environment, so there's no light. Light is like pollution noise to me. And I don't have a clock. I don't know. Kathy tells me it's time to do this, and I get myself ready, and then I just go for it. Sometimes I call late if I'm on the phone. Sometimes I call a person early. Or if it's in person, well, then I'm not in a dark space. They're there with me, and they show up when they show up, and I figure they must be on time because I'm not paying attention to it, which really is very confusing for most people, especially for Kathy, who's keeping a schedule, at least trying to. But when I get into the zone, I don't know how long I've been doing it, and it's not like I'm not there paying attention because I'm completely engaged. Some people that are channelers, they kind of fade out and do the channeling and fade back in. And how long has it been? Oh, it's been an hour and a half. Gosh, it seems like I close my eyes and open it. No, it's not like that for me. I know I'm engaged to this process. I just don't know how much time has passed because I'm busy doing whatever it is I'm doing. Climbing around inside of another person's body looking for tumors or broken bones or broken pieces or whatever. So I'm not paying attention to time. If I'm not careful, then I'll just be working with a person for a few hours, not even realize it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a place that's in between. I don't know if dimensions is a good word for it or not. I'm not sure what the terminology should be, but I guess suffice it to say that it is outside of time and space in a realm where I can't tell distance or duration. I just don't have any method of doing that while I'm working on a person.
Mm-hmm. So now we're looking at this new time, Jerry, where they say we're moving from 3D or third dimension into fourth and fifth dimension, so higher frequencies. What are your thoughts on any of this?
Well, I think these are terms that are meant to insinuate that we are evolving. Mm-hmm. And just like a lot of the terms that I use, I don't know how accurate any of these are. Dividing it up into different dimensions, what does that really mean, and so forth. My background is as, an engineer with, this mind process of putting everything into checks and balances where everything is explainable and understandable. And these terms, 3D and so forth, they have tangible relationships to, to different algorithmic functions and Boolean geometry and so forth. But in a spiritual sense, I don't see the transliteration. So it doesn't really have a significance to me. But then a lot of terms I use, people don't understand either. So it's not like I'm finding any fault. It's just that in my own mental construct. with that in mind, when I hear terms like this and I put it into my own understanding, the real basic, at the essence of what this is telling me is that we are evolving as a species. We are coming to a greater state of awareness. And people are using consciousness and awareness interchangeably, and I don't buy that. Let me explain. Consciousness is like you're in a dark room, and there are things around you. Consciousness is the flashlight that you have in your hand and you switch on. And so now it's lit up this region. Awareness is when the light returns back to your eyes and you understand what you're seeing. I think we're all conscious to varying degrees, but if you're up walking and eating an ice cream cone, you're conscious. It's where your level of awareness is at. How much of what you're pulling in do you digest and completely understand? So consciousness and awareness are two separate things. And I think as a species, as a people, as a group of souls in skin suits on this planet, we are evolving to a greater state of awareness where we're understanding things at a deeper and deeper level. And every time we do, there's another question, and we ask that question and look for answers. As we find answers, we discover that some of the old things that we knew are no longer correct because they are now updated with new data. And these new answers give us an entirely new sense of who we are, where we are, and so forth. So in realms that are used to describe 3D consciousness, 4D consciousness, and all of this, these are nice catchphrases, and they might serve others quite well. But for me, I see it all as an attempt to explain these stages of awareness that we're passing through where we're understanding things more and more distinctively, where we're getting answers. And as we evolve, one of the things that happens is that when we ask a question and we get an answer, our awareness has just increased because we knew enough to ask the question. The answer might or might not be correct, but we keep asking questions. And this is how the evolution occurs, so that our understanding grows and grows and grows. It's in trusting ourselves and trusting others that we come to even greater potentials of empowerment, because at that point, we can all be asking the same question, and suddenly there is a more profound answer that occurs.
That's beautiful. So in your time as healer, as lecturer about UFOs, as great explorer, who are you really, Jerry Wills?
Oh, I'm just another bozo on the bus. We're all on the road to nowhere, like the Talking Heads would say. Who am I really? Well, I don't know. And I think that's the reason why I keep looking.
That's awesome. Awesome. So, next adventure, what else are we discovering around the world, Jerry Wills?
Well, Kathy does the lion's share of research. I mean, she's just incredible when it comes to research. And what the next adventure is for us in regards to the ancient mysteries and so forth, well, she's uncovered some pretty amazing things having to do with, for example, the origins of people. And I think there's a lot of talk out there right now about the RH negative bloodline versus the RH positive bloodline and so forth. And what she's finding is that, and like a lot of other people are finding as well, so this isn't distinctively her discovery, but she's discovering for herself and for us that there was some tampering done with the human race at some point. And if it was done intentionally or accidentally, who knows? I mean, who would ever know? And it's easy enough to throw your hands up and go, oh, someone's been messing with the human race for some, untoward purpose. But who knows why it happened? I mean, if you think about it, if you were traveling through space and your ship crashed on a nice habitable planet like Earth, and there are some lower humanoid life forms here, you can only procreate with your own kind who were with you on this ship up to a certain point, and then you're going to have genetic deformities.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to introduce a new genetic strain into the mix, otherwise you're not going to survive. So maybe that happened. Or maybe it was, bad guy aliens coming down and recreating humans and making them more capable. Well, personally, I have a tendency to believe that one because I've seen enough evidence and been told enough things through my experiences that that's really kind of what happened. But however it occurred, there are different bloodlines on this planet, and that's one of the things Kathy's looking at. Another thing, it has to do with how advanced people were far back in time. Mm-hmm. And although there's enough evidence to support the notion that they really had some things going that we don't even have going now, mm-hmm. It's still made out like these people were really lucky if they could melt copper and hammer it into a nail. Mm-hmm. And yet these folks were doing things that are physically impossible for anyone on the earth to do right now. So she's looking into all of these things. And then that's, I guess, our next great adventure. Well, she's found some things around the United States that she wants to go take a look at that have to do with all of these things I just mentioned. So yeah. I suppose at some point this summer we'll be doing that.
So, Jerry, how can people get more information and look at some of your exciting adventures on TV?
Well, there are a variety of sources anymore. It seems that without, intending to do very much on my own to get myself out there, a lot of other people have done it for me. Mm-hmm. If folks are interested, they can see some really amazing interviews on Gaia TV. Mm-hmm. That's online or on your computer, on your Apple TV, I think it's on there. Maybe Amazon Fire. Anyway, with Regina Meredith, she's done several interviews with me on Gaia, and I think they're really amazing. There's also a lot of stuff now on YouTube. Mm-hmm. There's the Norway lecture, which I thought was quite good. There were like 3 lectures in Norway, so you have to sort of pick through there and see which one you think is good if you want to spend the time to watch them. Then there are a lot of other YouTube things as well. I have a few things on my website, jerrywills.com. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, the adventures at Xpeditions TV. It's Expeditions spelled with an X, not EX. And instead of .com, it's .tv. So it's expeditions.tv. There are quite a few episodes up there. We have some new ones that we're going to be putting up, and hopefully sometime this summer I'll get done with those. And then, of course, switching hats. There's the music.
Ah. So the music, where can we listen to the music?
It's all over the world now. Okay. You can go to iHeartRadio and just look for Jeff Bird Project. Jeff Bird, BYRD Project. We've been involved with Jeff for a few years now, and I play bass. Kathy is officially the noisemaker. She plays all the percussive instruments, like tambourine, congas, shakers, all that.
Right.
Especially the cowbell. She's quite a good cowbell player. She's a cowbell sinner, she says.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, Jerry, we thank you so much for hanging out with us the first hour, and I can't wait to get you into the woo-woo hour so we can really chat even deeper. So again, we thank you for being on this part and sharing your knowledge and sharing your experiences, because people are always curious, where did all this even come from? So
Sure.
when they recognize these things, they know that they are not crazy, even for simple things. We have gifts, and when your gifts show up, you see sometimes the trials and tribulations we go through before we fully accept and move on from there. And there's a whole world and more out there to explore. So thanks. Yeah, thank you for being on with us, Jerry Wills. And you're listening, or you've been listening to Boundless Spirit Radio with Charlene Springer. And that's our first hour, and hope to see you in the woo-woo hour. Take care.
Boundless Spirit goes off the rails. Next up in our members-only segment, the woo-woo hour. Whether it's happening on the planet, off the planet, or inside the planet, host Charlene Springer, expert guests, and you dare to go there in the woo-woo hour.